Everyone talks about reaching the C2 level of English, but you should ask yourself, what is that actually supposed to look like? Today, I'll show you and I'll break down what C2 leveled English actually looks like. If you're new here, I've helped many people with their English over the years, and unfortunately, I see a lot of you continue to make the most common mistakes over and over again, hindering your progress. To help you out, I recorded a free lesson showing you the fastest ways to become fluent in English on your own. If you'd like to check that out, I'll leave a link somewhere in the pinned comment or the description below. Now, before we can understand what C2 leveled English actually looks like, we need to break down the 7 different levels of English speaking. Now, if you're at the A1 level of speaking, you can probably use basic words and very basic phrases to identify certain things. At the A2 level of speaking, you should be able to have extremely basic conversations, whether it's asking someone for directions or giving someone directions or going to talk to the cashier to get your groceries at the grocery store. At the B1 level, you should probably be able to have more meaningful conversations about topics that you are very familiar with and basic conversations about basic things. At the B2 level of speaking, you should be able to speak spontaneously and confidently about basically anything. However, at the B2 level of speaking, even though you can speak spontaneously, you probably still make a lot of grammatical errors when you speak, and your accent might be difficult for some native English speakers to understand everything that you're saying. At the C1 level of speaking, you should be able to express anything fluently about any topic and make much fewer grammatical errors. And most, if not all, native English speakers should be able to understand your accent of English. Above the C1 level, but below the C2 level, is where I would say most native English speakers are when it comes to communication in English. This is simply because most native English speakers do not study grammar at a very profound level throughout the span of their lives. And at the C2 level of English, this is absolute mastery of the English language. You communicate with near perfect grammar, and your accent of English can be clearly understood universally. Not only this, but you understand advanced techniques in English communication, such as using literary devices, wordplay, advanced idioms, and things among the sort. And keep in mind, if you're going to set a fluency goal at the B2 level of English, that's pretty good for people who just want to be able to navigate their way through English speaking regions and be able to navigate their way through conversations with English speakers. At C1, this is also a good goal because this is a very proficient level of being fluent in English. But to be honest, I would only recommend pursuing the C2 level of English if you're trying to eventually teach English like a professor, or if you're trying to be a linguistics professional or a translator. But honestly, most native English speakers in the world do not know English at a C2 level. C2 is very, very advanced. So let's break down the 5 main skills of a C2 leveled English communicator. First off, C2 leveled communicators have a very nuanced understanding and nuanced application of advanced vocabulary and idioms in the English language. English learners at the C2 level don't just know the definition or the meaning of advanced words and advanced idioms. They know exactly when and how to use them appropriately, and they can do it effortlessly in a natural way. So, for example, instead of saying, I'm very tired, which is okay, but it's basic, a C2 leveled learner might use an advanced idiom instead, such as, I'm completely wiped out or I'm running on fumes. These are idioms that native English speakers would use, but usually people learning English as a second language wouldn't default to using. The second skill that sets C2 learners apart from everybody else is the combination of the spontaneity and the fluency and accuracy that they use when they communicate. C2 leveled communicators have mastered the skill of impromptu speaking, meaning they can jump into conversations spontaneously about any subject and add their own input, form their own opinion, and collect and articulate their own thoughts in a coherent way anywhere at any time about any subject. At the C2 level, your brain is fully developed and immersed in the English language. You think in English. You never translate back to your native language. At the C2 level, you even emote in the English language as if you have a completely separate personality in English as opposed to the personality that you have in your native language. At this level, there is no need to ever switch back to your native language or reach for words in your native language. You completely move and communicate and interact like a native English speaker. The third quality of C2 leveled communicators is that they have a mastery of tone, style, and register when commanding the English language. In other words, they know when to use formal language and informal language. They also know when sarcasm is appropriate. They can also crack jokes in English and use other advanced literary devices in English. In English, we have a slang term for this that we call code switching. To code switch in English simply just means to adapt the way that you speak and adapt the way that you communicate based on who you're talking to and the context of the situation. This is a quality that I really just see amongst the advanced levels of English, people who are at the C1 or the C2 level of English. For the intermediate and beginner levels of English, I see a lot of you guys tend to attribute aspects of the figure of speech of your native language over to the English language, and it just doesn't work. A very common example is that some people from certain parts of the world might address people as dear in English. It might be normal to address someone as dear in your native language, but in the English language, it's not normal at all. The term dear is reserved for a very formal situation. For example, a grandparent addressing their grandson or granddaughter as dear, or a husband maybe addressing his wife as dear. But to be honest, the term dear, it's a little bit outdated, it's a little bit old, and it's really reserved for very formal situations. So it sounds very awkward and very weird when you say that in the English language. But because it's normal in a lot of other people's native languages to use terms like dear, they try to think and project that onto the English language. But in the English language, with our figure of speech, it's not normal at all. And there are many other examples of situations like this as well. But at the C2 level, you actually think in English with an English figure of speech, and you think as if you were a native English speaker. This leads to the fourth skill, which is a really high level of listening comprehension, even when it's fast spoken English and the words are slurred or mumbled. Native English speakers tend to use a technique that is called sound linking. This is simply when we combine a bunch of different words in a sentence into one single word. So, for an example, instead of saying thank you very much, a lot of native English speakers might combine all four of those words into one word and say thank you very much. Or instead of saying what are you going to do about it, we might say what you're going to do about it. We'll combine all of the words just into one slur and into one sound linked word. At the C2 level of English, you'll be able to understand this. Now, this might seem intimidating at first, but if you can understand the context of the situation or the conversation, and if you can kind of guess what the person is saying based on how they're delivering it, then you should be able to pick up on this at the advanced levels of English. And to be honest, to acquire this skill, it's going to take time and it's going to take a lot of life experience interacting with native English speakers as they communicate with one another really fast and really slurred. And the fifth and final quality of C2 leveled English learners is that they can write literally better than most native English speakers. The thing about C2 leveled writers is that they study English grammar way more deeply, far more profoundly than any native English speaker does in school. As a native English speaker myself, I learned the English language by heart ever since I was born. For someone who reached the C2 level of English and speaks English as a second language, they probably studied very advanced grammar in school or by themselves. As a native English speaker, I fundamentally learn English differently than someone who speaks English as a second language. And another reality is that the standard of education for learning English is very low in a lot of the English speaking world. For example, in certain parts of the United States of America, a lot of people are completely illiterate just because the standard of education in those specific locations is very bad. For context, I would say that most native English speakers probably fall between the levels of B2 up to C1, but most native English speakers are absolutely not at the C2 level of English. So, to recap the 5 traits of a C2 leveled English learner, number 1, you should understand nuanced vocabulary and idiomatic use. Number 2, you should be able to speak both spontaneously and fluently with accuracy. Number 3, you should be able to master tone, style, and register when commanding the English language. Skill number 4, you should have a high level of listening comprehension, even if it's fast spoken English or slurred words. And skill number 5, you should be able to write, type, or text in English at a level superior to most native speakers with near perfect grammar. Now, you might be asking yourself, what can I do to get to the C2 level of English, if that's your goal? Getting to the C2 level does not necessarily need to be that complicated. You can still get to the C2 level of English in all 6 of the skills, being vocabulary and grammar, reading and listening, and speaking and writing, simply by following the proven techniques and the proven methods that I showcase throughout the YouTube channel. Leave a comment down below telling me where you're from and what your native language is. I would love to know. And as mentioned in the video, there are different aspects to the C2 level of English. Learning how to converse at the C2 level is cool, but you will also need to learn how to listen at the C2 level. To learn how to understand fast spoken English, be sure to watch the next video.